Stop.
Oh, hey, didn't know you had joined me. Let me get out of this and stop before we start having to listen to the Smashing Pumpkins and their whining. And we will come back to the class as a whole, and I will move my stuff so you can see my face. I'm not in the classroom, so I can't have my normal Elmo where I would show you my book and we would maybe show some ways about reading. So I decided to do it through a very nifty device called a CD and just put it right over my camera. It allows me to show you my book. What I was trying to show you there is a little bit about the way that we might approach reading. You know, there are many ways to read, and you probably read things differently depending on the type of text that you look at. Everybody does it. So if you're reading a comic book, you might not read it with a highlighter and a pen and a notebook to the side, although maybe you will, because there are some awesome comic books that are worth reading that way. But if you're reading your Twitter feed, you're certainly not going to do that. Or if you're reading text message, you're not going to go and analyze it. If you are reading a book of scholarship or something that you want to know, something you want to remember, something that will be helpful to you, or if you're reading because somebody told you to, then you should probably read it carefully. You should probably take notes, write in the margins, argue with the text, figure it out. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Not just because you may have a test on the matter, but because you want to know what other people know. You want to experience what other people experience. And so reading carefully is an important part of that. But also, if you can learn how to read carefully, read Descartes carefully, then you will be much better suited in this life for dealing with things that other people do not read carefully. You will be able to understand things at a different level because you have built the skills for reading. So for this class, I'm asking you to read carefully. We have a readings journal that you're doing that is asking you to engage with your reading at some level. And of course, we're going to have an exam and we're going to have a paper that will ask you to show that you've been reading carefully. Don't just rely on me to tell you what the stuff means. Find out for yourself and practice really careful reading. I'll mention with the reading journal. So I'm working on the stuff. In the first couple of weeks of class, I go kind of slow. I mean, I'm always kind of a slow grader, but I go kind of slow just because I'm trying to get everything established for the course. But I'll be getting your journals back to you probably next week. I mean, without a doubt next week, but it's not going to be the next couple of days. We're going to talk today. I just love my Greencast. We're going to talk today about thinking and what it means to think. And in order to do that, we're going to look at a PowerPoint. So I'm going to share that PowerPoint now. The PowerPoint I'm going to share is not real super long. It's not a whole bunch of detailed slides, but it does give me an opportunity to talk about some of the concepts that we're looking at. So let me go to my PowerPoint. You should be looking at it. Now you're looking at the last slide. I don't know why I started there. Okay. So the song we listened to at the start is from the Pixies called Where Is My Mind? And it's a pretty good way to start a course on thinking about the philosophy of mind. So let's go ahead and jump into it and think about what this means when we ask this question, where is my mind? Before we get too far, let's try something. Take your two fingers here and take your other arm here and pinch. Now you can pinch hard or you can pinch soft, but pinch. Do you feel that? Did you experience something? Do you know what you experienced? Are you there? How do we know what you experienced? How do I know that you experienced something? Or how do you know that I experienced something when I did this? How do we know that we experienced the same thing? How do I know what your pain felt like, or how do you know what my pain felt like? In fact, how can I even know that I did this? That this is something real? Philosophers have been asking questions, and not just philosophers, people have been asking questions about what we experience and what we know and what knowledge is, what consciousness is, what it means to be for a very, very long time. It is one of the essential elements of philosophy to figure out who we are, but not only who we are, how we know who we are. So, who are you? What are you? Where are you? When are you? How are you? Why are you? These questions are essential to matters of consciousness, matters of what we know. They are, of course, the questions that a reporter might ask in any given news story. They're the questions that we're supposed to find out when we're writing about something and trying to understand everything. Who, what, where, when, how, and why. And answering these questions seems simple sometimes, sometimes not so simple. Who are you? Who are you when you are standing in front of a classroom or sitting in front of a Zoom meeting where the class is presumably watching? Who are you when you are sitting in your bedroom watching a Zoom lecture? Who are you when you are in a classroom? Who are you when you are at work? Who are you when you are at church? Who are you when you are in the park? Who are you when you are with your girlfriend? Who are you when you with your boyfriend? Who are you when you are with casual friends who you don't make out with? There are many ways of answering who you are, and the fact that we can answer it in so many different ways calls into question what it means when we think we know who we are. All these different questions lead to us thinking about some fundamental work that philosophy does. Philosophy identifies how we go about finding out what we know. And philosophy goes about establishing what it is that we think we know. And philosophy goes about justifying and trying to argue for what it is that you know. And it may not even be questions of what you know. We can go into other fields of philosophy, like education. How do we learn? How do we teach? How do we know that? And then how do we justify it? What we're talking about right now in thinking about what we know is a particular field of philosophy called epistemology. Now, it's a big word, and it's a word that talks about the branch of philosophy about knowing shit, or what it means to know. It may be easier to remember that latter definition because it's smaller words, but there's a bunch of them. And epistemology actually does a little bit more than that. It is about finding out knowledge and establishing knowledge and arguing for knowledge. How we know, what we know, how we prove we know. There are three basic ideas where we can talk about how we know. Now, there are others that we can go into, and we're going to talk about some of those others next week. But getting these three down is pretty basic. And our readings this week are related to these three basic ideas. The first, mind, our rational mind. We can think logically, so we know. We can prove what we know because we can think logically. This is the Cartesian or the Descartes idea that you justify what you know, you justify existence through the mind. The picture on the right is a few graduates from Henry Ford College who are the most philosophical, not these three because I don't know them, but I'm sure they are. Henry Ford students, the most philosophical students I've ever taught, the ones who deal most with philosophical issues. The second way of knowing and establishing what we know is through body. The pinch, the hunger, the sight, the hearing, the smell, the feeling. What we can sense is what we know. We experience our bodies in the world, and that allows us to know. I don't know who the dude is in the rainstorm there. The final way that we have a way of going about knowing is through our soul, our beliefs. An external sense of knowledge out there that we somehow can have access to. We can somehow pull down and know that it's true. This is an experience of faith, but maybe also an experience of insight or enlightenment, something that we have to go through a process to get to, but once you have it, you know that this external reality, this external truth has become a part of who you are. The image here is an image of Sun Ra, who is a pretty amazing jazz experimental avant-garde artist who has a lot of knowledge that he has found. Let's talk about Descartes. So, Rene Descartes, from the early 1600s, is often thought of as being the father of modern rationalism, which, as itself, by itself, as a statement of knowledge, is kind of a BS statement. Rationalism is something people have been doing for a very long time. Now, what is modern? Is 1600 modern? Maybe there's been other people since then that are more modern that have founded more modern ways of rationalism. But what when we claim that Descartes is the founder of modern rationalism, we are falling into a pretty patriarchal style of knowledge. That he is these great people, particularly these great white men of the past, have established what truth is, and Descartes is one of those. He is fairly important. I mean, it's important, the work that he did, to say, let's move away from this sense that the body is the only thing that matters, or let's move away from this sense that faith is the only thing that matters, and let's recognize that rationalism, your brain, reason, is the only source of knowledge. The only way we can know that this happens when I take these fingers and pinch here, the only way we can know that is through reason. Our brains can get fooled by our experiences all the time. And I'm going to Descartes in my book. I should have left it open, but I moved it when I moved the thing. Descartes starts at the, I'm going to read a little bit of the passages to you. Descartes starts at the level of doubt. Anything which admits the slightest doubt, I will set aside, just as if I found it to be wholly false, and I will proceed in a way until I recognize something certain, or, if nothing else, I recognize for certain there is no certainty. Now, how is it that I could possibly doubt what this is, what this means? Why is it that Descartes wants to base things on reason that can be proven? And why aren't your senses a reason that can be proven? Well, I want you to just think about some kind of food that you used to love, but you no longer love. Let's say some super sweet candy. But children love super sweet candy, and as we grow, our desire for those things sometimes change. We no longer think what we thought was awesome is really awesome. Or we could just go with baby food. You used to love strained peas. Do you love them still? Do you think the strained peas are the best food? What you thought you knew, you no longer know, because you changed. And so we can't base our certainty, our sense of knowledge, on what we've experienced or what we think we know. There's nothing certain there. But here's another way to think about this. If you think about the things that you did in your childhood, what is it that you actually know about your childhood? What experiences did you have? How real were they? If I think back to my childhood, and I'm probably older than most of you, so I've got a longer ways to think, but if I think back to my childhood, most of the stories that I have probably come from my mother and father. I remember some things that happened to me. Certainly they seem very real, but those things that most of the stories came from my mother and father. How do I know they're real? If I can't remember them myself, how do I know they're real? Or is my memory always trustworthy? What I had for breakfast? How did it taste? What was my experience? Did it fill me? If I can't even remember 8 hours ago, can I remember 2 minutes ago? This is all can be a little bit maddening. Our brains can go a little crazy when we try to figure out what it is we know. And this is why, because of this maddening nature, because we can just get into this swirl, this whirlwind of thoughts that never seems to end, and our doubt gets so certain. The only thing we have that is certain is our doubt. This is why Descartes wants to base knowledge and our sense of self on reason. And since the only thing we can be certain of is our uncertainty, that in itself provides us with a recognition that we exist. All of our ideas are innate. They're all inside. Because they're all inside, we can then start to recognize that I lost my train of thought. I'm so very sorry. After considering, this is on page 313, after considering everything thoroughly, I must finally conclude that this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true whenever it is put forward by me or conceived in my mind. So in another writing, Descartes said, cogito ergo sum. My Latin's not great, I'm sorry, my French is not great. I don't know. When Descartes said cogito ergo sum, he was saying, I think, therefore I exist. He's changed that a little bit in this passage. And what he says is no longer I think, therefore I exist. I am, I exist. But that's just a saying. That is one of those truisms that we talked about in our discussion board. The fact that he can say that truism means that he must exist, because the only place it could have come from is his brain. We discover truths by intuition, by grasping basic connections between the ideas we have, and then we deduce or demonstrate more complex truths. It is the functionings of the brain that make us know we exist. Gilbert Ryle disagrees. Gilbert Ryle is a philosopher that came about in the 1950s, and Ryle's philosophy starts at a rejection of Descartes. The thought that we can only base our knowledge on our experience, for Ryle, is a real fallacy in thought. That Descartes was creating something there that, if we believe that we can only base our knowledge on thought, then we are creating a fallacy. That it's falling for something, an untruth. Ryle wants us to ask, what sort of knowledge can be secured on the workings of a mind? On the one side, according to the official theory, that is Cartesian theory, a person has direct knowledge of the best imaginable kinds of workings of his mind. Mental states and processes are normally conscious states and processes, and the consciousness which irradiates from them can engender no illusions and leaves no door open for doubt. But for Ryle, that certainty that comes through thinking is false. And here's why. How can I know that what you say you're thinking is something you're actually thinking? How can I know what you say is true is actually something that is true for you, let alone for me? When we want to say that reality is based in thought, we lose sense of a fundamental truth, and that is thought can lie. Thought can be confused. Thought can be disrupted. And what we lose sight of is that our thought is really just a function of our bodies. It happens in a brain. Mind is a cute concept, but it is a ghost in the machine. It's a great phrase, the ghost in the machine. And what that phrase means, it's not just a Police album, although if you haven't heard the Police album, Ghost in the Machine, go listen to that. The ghost in the machine is that there is this phantom idea that something is happening up here that is more real than something that is happening here, or something that is happening there. That was probably really loud on my mic. Sorry about that. What Ryle wants us to know is that the mind is not a different substance than any other part of human experience. It's just a domain of discourse. It is a way of speaking to each other, speaking to ourselves. It is part of our ability to talk. The mind, then, is a behavior of the body. It is not something separate. Physical objects exist. Mental objects are merely part of our vocabulary. Ryle doesn't necessarily have much more to argue than that. And that's not reducing his argument at all, because the disruption of the Descartes idea is important. But what he wants to argue is that if this is true, that mind is just something we've created, then we are really messing ourselves up by focusing on trying to fix that mind. We just need to fix what we do with our bodies. The third reading we did was on Buddha and the Siddhartha path to knowledge. The previous two slides, by the way, I didn't create those. I found them because they were pretty good samples on Descartes and Ryle's arguments. This one I've created, and I should say that I'm not an expert on Buddha. I know I have some understanding of it. I've done some reading on it, and I've actually participated in Buddhist practice a little bit, not a whole lot. But here's what my understanding of Buddha, the Buddha mind, is. From confusion, our basic confusion in our thinking, our ability to process information, our ability to know our own minds, that's all confusion. It's all swirling around up here. It's not only just ghosts in the machine, it's just wacky machines that we can't quite understand. From that confusion, we must find awareness. We must be able to clear it and find awareness. And from suffering, from our pinchings, from our bangings, from our knocking into each other, from our pain from our older bodies, or our fear from our younger bodies, from all of the suffering that we experience in the world, we must find a peace. It's not just some simple peace, but we must come to an awareness that there is balance between suffering and joy. And from separation, we are separated from each other. I am separated from you pretty significantly in this semester. I'm separated even from my spouse, who I sleep beside every night, who I've been married to for a number of years. I'm separated from her. I'm separated from even my child, who climbs all over me. Sometimes I'm even separated from my sense of self. From this separation, this complete isolation, we must find connection. When we can move past confusion and suffering and separation, when we can move past the chaos of our minds and the pains of our bodies and the separation of our identities, we may find a nirvana, a balance between what we experience as confusion and what we experience as awareness, and what we experience in suffering and what we experience in peace, and what we experience in separation and what we experience in connection. And when we can bring these things together, we can experience a nirvana, a state of knowing that allows us to experience it all. Buddhist thinking brings in both body and mind, but it has with it an element that there is something out there that we can access, some kind of state of being that we can access, which is nirvana. These senses of knowing, body, mind, and soul, have with them some problems. And we're going to look at some other ways of thinking next week to consider more what it is we know or how we think we know. And those ways of that we're going to look at next week are going to deal with some of these problems. But here are some basic problems with knowing what you know, with finding what you know, the process you go through, with actually knowing it and learning it, and then with arguing it. Here's some basic problems. Other people. When I argue with you what I think I know, how do I know that you understand what I'm talking about? Or how do you know that I understand what I'm talking about? How can I understand your experience, especially if what you argue is different than what I argue? And this doesn't even get into how can we understand the difference when a 52-year-old talks to an 18-year-old, or a mother talks to a child, or a father talks to a child. How can we understand that difference in age? How can we understand that difference in personhood? Or how do I know that when I'm speaking here, what I speak about knowledge matters to somebody who lives in an Aboriginal tribe? How do we know what other people experience? That leads into also identity. As a white man, a middle-class white man, a middle-aged white man, middle-class, middle-aged white man, it's an awful lot of just being common. So, or just being middle. As a middle-aged, middle-class white man, how do I know that my experience is valid versus another person's experience, versus somebody who is of a different cultural identity experience? How do we know which is valid? Or do those different identities influence the way we experience things and the way we argue about our experiences? The processes we go through to understand ourselves, the knowledge that we think we gain, the ways that we go about arguing, do our different experiences impact the ways that we do these things, the ways that we can talk about these things? We can go to emotions and our emotional states and how our emotions impact who we think we are. We can go to illness or ability, and I should have the word ability on there instead of illness. We can go to different abilities and what our different abilities have, what kind of impact they have on our awarenesses of knowledge. It's very easy for people who feel like they have no ability difference from others, they're just normal. It's very easy for people who feel like they are normal to look at somebody who is physically, apparently differently abled and say that that experience of self, that mind, is different than mine. Artificial intelligence. How does artificial intelligence impact what we believe we know about mind? When we have Siri who can come alive, not very effectively, but Siri right now who can come alive, or when we have a future artificial intelligence that is even more alive, how will we know that what we argue about minds actually matters? Maybe we are arguing something that is going to be false in the future. The problems of artificial intelligence complicate our awareness of what our minds do, as do altered states, drugs, alcohol, some sense of joyful, ecstatic behavior. Altered states affect what it is we know or how we think we know, as does time. I pointed out earlier, the difference between what a child experiences and what an adult experiences, but also just the difference between era, the 1600s versus the 1900s, the difference in space. If what I experiencing at the beginning of this lecture, or the difference in time and space, what I experience at the beginning of this lecture is different than what I'm experiencing at the end, because I'm sure you're feeling that. There's a term that began to be popularized in 2016 at the start of the Donald Trump presidency. maybe popularized a little bit before that. And it's a term that is gone, not being used quite as frequently, but what is happening, what this term represented is happening ever more frequently. And that is the term of gaslighting. The idea that when somebody says something, they say something that is clearly objectionably false, or objectively false. When they say something that is clearly objectively false and they expect you to believe it. Gaslighting. We live in a gaslighting era. How can we know that what we say is true? That what we say is something that we've actually developed as a meaning? How can we know that what somebody else is saying is true? We live in an era where we call out other people for what they've said. We live in an era where we can cancel other people for what they've said. We can live in an era where Kanye West can tell somebody else to stop lying. Our access of our epistemologies, how we go about learning, what we think we know, and how we justify that. Our epistemologies matter. It's a big idea. It seems kind of abstract and kind of BS, like why should we even talk about it? But it does matter. How we define knowledge matters because it's clearly affecting our world right now. Is it a coronavirus or is it a flu? Do you need to wear a mask or do you don't? What is true? We're going to talk more about this next week. We're going to keep on talking about it because epistemology doesn't go away just because you move on to a different form of philosophy. Before we go, I want to mention one other form of epistemology, and we'll probably try to do a little bit of reading. But last week we read about philosophy, and last week we read about philosophies of education and ways that we know that we are teaching and learning. Well, one of those people that we mentioned last week was Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire had a had a philosophy of consciousness and dialecticism, where the way that we know knowledge is how we reflect with each other, how one person influences another, and that person influences the other. And so we build knowledge collectively through our discussion, our discourse. Freire believed that we could free our minds by freeing them into each other, and that is where knowledge comes. You're hopefully doing that a little bit through your discussion boards, through your discussions with your people in your family, through watching my face and arguing with me or telling me just, come on, hurry it up. You're hopefully doing that a little bit through your writing, which is a type of discourse. You can come and do it in our philosophy cafe. We had 5 people in our philosophy, or 6 with me, 6 people in our philosophy cafe, and it was a great discussion. How else are we going to know what we know? At least this is one of the things. Philosophy teachers don't like to say what they believe, but this is one of the things I firmly believe. How else are we going to know what we know unless we share it with others and we let them share what they believe with us? Share along. See you next week.